This is the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusive scottishvisits.co.uk.
Hello, this is John Harbour and welcome to Unique Scotland, the go-to podcast on all things Scottish. And I'm delighted to have you with me for the second episode of a tour around Scotland's largest city, Glasgow. Well, as I broadcast, it's now the beginning of March and I'm back home in Aberlady, and I'm pleased to report the sun is out, spring's around the corner and the temperature gauge has risen to 8 degrees centigrade or 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Almost tropical. In the last episode, we left George Square to visit the medieval High Street, and we saw the stunning St Mungo's Cathedral. I explained about the ancient symbols of Glasgow and how they came about, and after the High Street we visited Glasgow Green and saw the People's Palace, the amazing Doulton Fountain, and Templeton's carpet factory designed to look like the Doge Palace in Venice. I've had some interesting feedback from some who were totally unaware of Glasgow's history, and folks, there's a lot more to come. In this second episode, we'll pick up where we left off, just leaving Glasgow Green, and head down towards the River Clyde, then west, through the centre of the city again and over to the ancient University of Glasgow. Most of Glasgow dates from around the 19th century onwards, and even some of these amazing 19th century facades are fronting what is an extremely modern building behind. Just to let you know, I've taken quite a few photographs of Glasgow, so have a look on my podcast page of the website, exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk, to see some of the sights of the city. I've also been posting on my Facebook page and Instagram, and there are short videos of Glasgow on my YouTube channel, Exclusive Scottish Visits. And if you have a look at any of these channels, then please follow or subscribe. Well, it's going to be a blast, so wherever you are in the world, I would now like you to relax and to join me on the second episode of Glasgow City, a panoramic tour. Well, we finished the first episode at Glasgow Green, and we now turn around and leave the park from where we entered, and turn left onto the A8, or the road known as the Salt Market. We've done a bit of a loop as this is a continuation of the High Street we came down earlier, and this road runs all the way down to the River Clyde. On your right hand side you will see an impressive yellow sandstone building with a large pediment and 6 Doric columns. This is the High Court of Judiciary, and is responsible for trying the most serious crimes in Scotland, for example, crimes such as treason, murder, rape, armed robbery, drug trafficking, etc. Directly across the road from the High Court, and on the edge of Glasgow Green, is a large archway built in yellow sandstone with 4 vertical columns adorning the frontage. This is the MacLennan Arch, which was the facade of another building called the Assembly Rooms in Ingram Street in the 18th century, which held musical, dance and cultural events. When it was eventually demolished, the archway was retained and used in other developments over the years, finally being rebuilt here. And we then continue on at the bottom of the street, we turn right onto Clyde Street, and the River Clyde is on our left-hand side. You'll pass under a railway bridge that used to carry trains into St Enoch Station, but which has long since been demolished. I have to say the Victorian red sandstone pillars holding up the bridge are mightily impressive. When I was driving there recently, there were a lot of trees on the left-hand side. It was a pity because you would have had a good view of Glasgow Central Mosque, built in 1984, and the largest mosque in Scotland. Well, as you drive along Clyde Street, at the first major junction on the right-hand side, you will see a low-lying building called the Clutha. The Clutha, C-L-U-T-H-A, which is allegedly the oldest pub in Glasgow. It dates to before the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, when Glasgow businessman Matthew Park built a tenement on the land. The premises was granted a licence in 1819 and adopted many names over the years, for example, the Popinjay, McLaughlin's, Weeman's and the Merchant, and finally becoming Clutha, which is the ancient name for the River Clyde. Very apt. The pub's character and reputation has grown over the years as a hub for local fishermen, lawyers, judges, as well as musicians, artists and poets. It's a real eclectic mix of Glasgow society. Indeed, Scotland's very famous comedian and singer Billy Connolly and Jerry Rafferty performed here as the Humble Bums, and the pub became a centre for folk music in the 1960s. However, I must tell you of a rather sad case. On the 29th of November 2013, disaster struck when a police helicopter crashed through the roof of the Clutha, killing the 3 helicopter crew and 7 people inside, with 30 others injured, some very seriously. The subsequent investigation concluded that the cause of the crash was fuel starvation due to incorrect operation of the fuel system. The news, which reverberated around the world, stunned Scotland. It took 2 years to overcome the tragedy, but the Clutha has once again opened its doors and is going strong, with a good bar, restaurant and of course a great music scene. Well, as you continue down Clyde Street, you will see that there has been considerable regeneration, and many of the old buildings on the right-hand side have been demolished to make way for chic private accommodation in the form of modern apartments. Then, suddenly, between these modern 21st century apartments is a lovely early 19th century church built by James Gillespie Graham in the neo-Gothic style. This is the Metropolitan Catholic Cathedral Church of St Andrew and is dedicated to Scotland's patron saint. There's quite a story behind its construction, and I'd like to take you back, just for a moment, I have to say, to Scotland's Reformation in 1560, when Catholics were most unwelcome in the city, especially after John Knox's hordes had destroyed most of the fabric of Catholic worship. It would take over 200 years for the rights of Catholics to worship openly, with the introduction of the Roman Catholic Relief Act of 1791, and this act restored certain civil rights and the freedom to worship for those who had, over the years, to hide their faith and worship in secret. Well, in the early 1800s, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was a huge demand for workers from the Highlands and Ireland in particular, which saw a rise in the number of Irish Roman Catholic immigrants to the city. In turn, there was a huge demand from those Catholics for a Catholic church to be built, and the decision was taken in 1814 to build this church on this site. At the time, it was a controversial decision, and there was some hostility to the construction. This led to some anti-Catholics going out at night and tearing down the work that had been carried out during the day, thus delaying the build. Eventually, night watchmen were employed to protect the work, and the church was completed in 1816, 2 years after the start. I have to say, it's a lovely building and very well worth a visit. Continue along Clyde Street, and you'll drive under a large overpass which takes all the rail lines into and out of Glasgow, and the main central station is off to the right-hand side. At the next junction, you'll come to York Street on the right-hand side, and you'll see signs for Glasgow Centre, where you should turn right. However, just before you do, look off to the left and you'll see a pedestrian bridge called the Tradeston Bridge, known locally as the Squiggly Bridge because of its strange snake-like figure as it crosses the River Clyde. Now, squiggly is a word that means curvy or not straight, thus the name. It opened in May 2009, linking the districts of Anderston on the north bank to Tradeston on the south bank, and the aim of the bridge being to aid the regeneration of Tradeston by giving it a direct link to the city's financial district on the western side of the city centre. It's at this point anyway that we turn right up York Street towards the centre of the city once more. York Street flows onto West Campbell Street, and modern offices adorn this street on both sides, with the occasional 19th and early 20th century red or white sandstone buildings showing a Georgian architectural age not long gone and replaced by new shiny glass-fronted buildings. A good example of the older dressed sandstone building is at the junction of West Campbell Street and Bothwell Street on the left-hand side, where you'll see a delightful clock sticking out from the building, which houses offices above and a cafe below. The clock tells us that it was built for the Scottish Legal Life Assurance Society in the 1930s. Well, continue up Campbell Street and turn left onto St Vincent Street. Well, you've got to turn left as it's one way, unless that is, of course, you're walking. Just before you turn left, look across the road to the right, diagonally, to see number 200 St Vincent Street. This is the old North British and Mercantile building designed by Sir John James Burnet, and it's a great example of 19th century build with grand columns and sculptures. On this building you'll see Doric columns at the doorway, above which are two beautifully sculpted crouched figures, and above the doorway itself is the figure of St Andrew. Sir John Burnet was the first Scottish architect to train in Paris, aged just 15 in the 1870s. He went on to design the Charing Cross mansions on the corner of Sauchiehall Street, inspired by Paris's Hôtel de Ville, and we'll see those shortly on our tour. Well, getting back onto the tour up St Vincent Street, this is one of the major streets in 1800 Glasgow, formed as part of the new town of Blytheswood, and we'll be entering Blytheswood Square shortly. Many of the streets of Glasgow were named after famous individuals or battles of the past, and St Vincent Street was named to commemorate the Battle of St Vincent, which was fought between the Royal Navy and the Spanish fleet off Cape St Vincent, Portugal, on the 15th of February 1797. The Spanish fleet was on its way to join Napoleon's fleet, and this victory gave Britain a considerable advantage over Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars. The fleet was led by Admiral Sir John Jarvis, but our most famous Admiral, Lord Nelson, was then a captain at the time, commanding HMS Captain. He actually disobeyed orders to break the line and take on two much larger ships than his own, and through extraordinary skill, bravado and bravery, he eventually captured them both. The story of the battle is really quite extraordinary, and I commend it to you when you get the time. St Vincent Street is probably one of the grandest streets in Glasgow, with many notable buildings by famous 19th century architects. And as you drive up the street, you'll come to number 242 on the right-hand side, and this is the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow, which was founded in 1599 by Peter Lowe after receiving a royal charter from James VI, who, as many of you may remember, was the son of Mary Queen of Scots. It's said that the museum in this building holds the implement that took some shrapnel out of Lord Nelson's eye during an amphibious assault at Calvi on the island of Corsica. He had been standing near a forward gun battery and a shell exploded nearby, throwing up sand and debris into his eye. Unfortunately, this left him blind in his right eye, and you'll know from portraits that he wore an eye patch. Indeed, the phrase turning a blind eye comes from Nelson, who apparently held a telescope up to his blind eye so that he couldn't see his Commander-in-Chief's flags signalling retreat during the Battle of Copenhagen. Well, the British went on to win, thanks to Nelson. OK, I'll stop my sea stories. You can tell I'm a retired naval officer, but to me the connections with street names are just fascinating, especially when the Royal Navy and Nelson are involved. Continuing up St Vincent Street and beyond the Physicians' College, on the left-hand side is the magnificent Alexander Thomson's Presbyterian Church. He's always described as Alexander Greek Thomson because of his Roman Greco style of architecture, and this church is no exception. It's been described as one of the finest romantic classical churches in the world and was listed in the 1998 World Heritage Watch by the World Monuments Fund. It was built in 1859 and has been described as a jaw-dropping monolith with architectural references from the Temple of Solomon. In this church you can clearly see the temple and then this extraordinary Egyptian-styled spire towering above the local landscape. It's a real treasure, and hopefully one day it will be restored to its former glory. Greek Thomson designed numerous villas, terraces, tenements and commercial office blocks around the city, and although Glasgow is probably better known for Charles Rennie Mackintosh, Greek Thomson buildings are well worth looking out for. Just up ahead, we'll turn right at the traffic lights, and as we turn, look left at the beautiful red sandstone church with massive spire. This is St Columba's Church, built in 1904. The congregation of St Columba actually dates back to 1770, when a church was established to cater for the large number of Gaelic speakers who came down from the Highlands and Islands, seeking work and escaping the ravages of famine and the clearances. And because of its association with the Gaelic language, it's often referred to as the Highland Cathedral. Before we leave St Vincent Street, it's worth mentioning that the street was used in 2022 during the filming of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. St Vincent Street actually became New York City during the filming. So we turn right into Pitt Street, then onto West George Street, before arriving at Blytheswood Square. And before arriving in the square, you may have noticed a Greek-designed building, not Greek Thomson this time, I have to say, but still a church by J. Stephen. It has a massive Greek-style doorway opening and served as St Jude's Episcopal Church from 1839, but it's now a restaurant, and to date, March 25, it's called the Malmaison, which is a stylish bar and grill. Coming into Blytheswood Square, you could be forgiven if you feel you're in Edinburgh's New Town. Well, the square is laid out to a plan by the Edinburgh New Town architect, James Craig. This was at the behest of a man named William Harley, who purchased 35 acres of Blytheswood land from the Campbells of Blytheswood. The 4 lovely Georgian terraces that were subsequently built in the 1820s are superb examples of luxury townhouse living in the 19th century. It's certainly worth walking around the square to get a closer look at the houses, some of whom have very interesting histories. Townhouse number 5, for example, became the home of the Lady Artists Club, formed by the Glasgow Society of Lady Artists in 1882, and it was the first lady artists club in Britain. Margaret MacDonald, the wife of Charles Rennie Mackintosh and an artist in her own right, was involved in alterations to the building, and you can see some clear indications of the MacDonald-Mackintosh influence from the front. The door, for example, still survives. Now, we all love a good scandal. Well, the neighbouring house at the corner of Byers Street was home to the infamous 21-year-old Miss Madeleine Smith, who was charged with poisoning her lover, Pierre-Émile Langelier, an apprentice gardener and some 10 years her senior, and she was accused of poisoning him with arsenic in 1857. They used to meet in secret and exchange numerous letters. Her parents knew nothing of the affair, and when her father found an appropriate marriage match for her, she tried to end the relationship with Langelier. He refused and threatened to expose her by releasing all her letters. He died suddenly of poisoning soon afterwards, and it was the discovery of the letters that brought Madeleine to the attention of the police authorities. She was subsequently charged with murder and tried in the High Court in 1857 of poisoning her lover with arsenic, and the story became the scandal of the time. However, the evidence was considered to be inconclusive, and the jury finally reached a verdict on the charges not proven, which is the strange and controversial verdict that almost no other country in the world other than Scotland has in their legal system. It's a sort of, we know you're guilty, but we just don't have the evidence. Anyway, Madeleine walked free and eventually settled in New York, living to a ripe old age. From the 1900s, some of the houses were bought up and converted to offices, and on the eastern side of the square you'll find the original offices of the Royal Scottish Automobile Club. Since 2009, the premises have become the 5-star Blytheswood Square Hotel. As it happens, this was the official starting point for Monte Carlo Rally between 1949 and 1973. From Blytheswood Square, continue down the hill on West George Street, and you're still driving along an avenue with Georgian houses, which have in most cases now transformed into offices or restaurants. A few hundred metres later, turn left onto Hope Street. And the first pub on the right-hand side as you drive up Hope Street is the Pot Still. Well, that's as of March 2025, which is an extraordinary selection of Scottish whiskies. Continue until you cross over West Regent Street, and the tall building on your right-hand side is Lion Chambers, built in 1907. And you'll see a crest on the first floor of the building with a lion's head. The building was commissioned by William George Black, a lawyer, and its intended use was for Glasgow lawyers. But Black was also well established within the Glasgow Art Club, so he integrated into his plans an artist's studio located on the top floor. The building material was reinforced concrete, and it was the first building to be constructed using this method. Sadly, it's fallen into disrepair over the last few years and is abandoned today. However, it's a Category A listed building, so Glasgow Corporation will have to make a decision on its refurbishment sooner rather than later. At the next junction, turn left into Bath Street, named after the establishment of some swimming baths in the 19th century. It was all down to a man called William Harley, a self-made millionaire who used to keep cows and other livestock on Bath Street, and he was responsible for the purchase of the Blytheswood estate I mentioned earlier. Apparently, he was a larger-than-life character whose major claim to fame was in 1804 founding the first public baths, which included a swimming pool and washhouse in Scotland. He created a simple laundrette where locals could bring their laundry to wash, dry and iron their clothes, and these were called steamies, and a large number of songs and poetry as well as plays and films have been produced depicting the life in a steamie, which gives a real insight into working class Glasgow in the 19th century. After my last episode 1 on Glasgow, I had comments on my YouTube channel regarding steamies, and Boadicea's Revenge, you know who you are, commented that she went to see the steamie play on stage and found it absolutely hilarious. However, if you're not from Scotland, you may need a translator to understand the Glasgow accent. Well, William Harley was certainly ahead of his time, and he also provided fresh water from the springs on his estate to meet the needs of a growing population. An innovative individual, and public baths and steamies grew up all over Glasgow. Anyway, now you know the real reason behind the name Bath Street. As you drive up the street, there's a mixture of Georgian buildings with the more modern glass-fronted buildings. Continue on until you arrive at a Gothic-style church on the right-hand side. This is St Stephen's Church, built in 1852 by J.T. Emmett, and it's said to have the tallest steeple in Glasgow. Sadly, in the storm of 1998, actually on St Stephen's Day, which is a bit spooky to me, the spire came crashing down. It's a beautifully styled church built in polished Kenmure sandstone, with a tall nave supported on clustered columns with finely carved musical angels. In the 1960s, a new church centre with side chapel, offices, halls and a restaurant were added, and that's now called the Renfield Centre. And I've been there a few times. It has excellent facilities. Indeed, the Scottish Tour Guide Association has used it during training weekends. I'm a mentor to the new trainee Blue Badge guides, and we've used the Renfield Centre as a meeting point during days of training. Before I go on, perhaps I should explain what a Blue Badge tourist guide is. Well, we belong to the Scottish Tour Guide Association, and we are the only professional membership body for fully trained, accredited guides within Scotland. Now, Visit Scotland, which is the national tourism organisation, recognises the Scottish Tour Guides Association for providing fully trained and accredited tourist guides. The training, I have to say, is a tough 18-month course attached to one of Scotland's leading universities. If the students pass, they receive the coveted Blue Badge, which is recognised as an industry standard of professionalism and dedication. So, next time you're looking for a guide in Scotland, search the Scottish Tour Guide Association or STGA website for a guide, knowing that you're hiring the best of the best, effectively the Top Gun of Scottish guides. Well, go through the next set of traffic lights, and on the left-hand side you'll see the wonderful King's Theatre by architect Frank Matcham, built in 1904. It's primarily a venue for touring musicals, dance, comedy and circus-type performances, but it also provides a stage for local amateur productions. I've been a couple of times myself, and I particularly enjoyed the annual Christmas pantomime. As of March 2025, actually showing tonight, is Guys and Dolls musical. Absolutely wonderful. Leaving the King's Theatre behind, continue down Bath Street until you come to a set of lights, then you cross over the M8. That's the main motorway running through the centre of Glasgow, and the road that connects Glasgow with Edinburgh. Then turn right onto North Street. We are now in the Charing Cross area of Glasgow, and as we turned on your left-hand side, you might have noticed the fabulous yellow sandstone building with a huge green copper dome on top, and there's a bronze statue called Literature by Thomas Clapperton on top of that. This is the Mitchell Library, which is the largest public reference library in Europe. It was established in Ingram Street in 1877 from a donation by Stephen Mitchell, a wealthy tobacco producer. The library was moved to this new building in 1911 when it opened, and the foundation stone was actually laid by Andrew Carnegie in September 1907. And I spent many happy days in this library while studying for my Blue Badge course from 2012, and it's an excellent facility. Anyway, continue up North Street and you'll pass under a relatively modern extension to Tay House, located on the other side of the motorway. It has had a number of uses, but as of March 2025, it's been taken over by Glasgow University for admin purposes. You'll be continuing straight on as you pass under the office block onto the A804 and then turning left to follow the signs for Glasgow University. You'll filter left, otherwise you'll end up on the motorway heading to Edinburgh. Now, when you come out from under the office block, on the left-hand side, you'll see a lovely red sandstone structure. It's at the corner of Woodside Crescent and Sauchiehall Street, and is a fountain that's one of the city's true iconic landmarks, the Cameron Memorial Fountain. Built in 1896 by public subscription to honour Mr. Cameron, a former newspaper editor, in recognition to his many services to Glasgow and to Scotland in general, and during his 21 years as an MP between 1874 and 1895. It's a two-level terracotta structure in Baroque style. This Victorian fountain and its clock tower was designed by architect Robert Bryden and features bronze portrait medallions of Mr. Cameron as part of its hexagonal dome. But the thing you'll notice is that it stands at an angle, appearing to have a drunken tilt. This is rather funny because Sir Charles Cameron was one of the city's foremost temperance movement or teetotal campaigners. He was responsible for the introduction of the Inebriates Act, which saw habitual drunkards blacklisted, and those establishments that continued to serve them alcohol were heavily fined. Locally, it's known as the Leaning Tower of Glasgow, and for those who fear it may fall down, well, it's been like this for almost 100 years, so let's hope it remains that way for the next 100. We now turn into Woodlands Road, a lovely example of Victorian town planning, with Park Circus being comparable with Edinburgh, London or Bath, architecturally. On the right-hand side as you turn, you'll see the beautiful red sandstone building named Charing Cross Mansions, designed by Sir John James Burnet in 1902, inspired by Paris's Hotel de Ville, and I mentioned Burnet earlier when detailing the mercantile building in the city centre. This lovely building is an upmarket tenement block built at a time when the city had plenty of money and some professional working people were enjoying the affluence of Glasgow's rise. Well, just before we leave Charing Cross area, I thought I'd mention this area became known as the Square Mile of Murder due to 4 notorious murders that took place between 1857 and 1908. Now, I've told you about Madeleine Smith, who probably laced her lover Pierre-Emile Langelier cocoa with arsenic. Then there was the Sandiford murder case, in which Jessie Macpherson was brutally struck 40 times with a meat cleaver. Then there was the serial killer Dr. Edward William Pritchard, known as the Human Crocodile, whose victims included his mother-in-law Jane Taylor and his wife Mary Jane Pritchard, whom he poisoned, and then he had the coffin lid unscrewed so that he could kiss her. The final one involved a lady called Marion Gilchrist, who in 1908 was bludgeoned to death at home by an intruder. The murder was pinned on a man named Oscar Slater, who was initially sentenced to hang but was reprieved with a 30-year jail term of hard labour. The evidence against him was so flawed that a continuous petition to fight the conviction was raised. Sadly, it took 20 years to clear his name and for him to be freed, and thereafter it was acknowledged as a huge miscarriage of justice. The real killer was never caught. Well, having slightly digressed, and if you're listening to this in bed, by the way, I do hope you sleep soundly tonight, let's move down onto Woodlands Road and look out for a small statue on the left-hand side. This is a 2-legged equestrian statue called Lobby Dosser. It's by Tony Morrow and Nick Gillan from 1992, and it's a memorial of Bud Neal, who 1911 to 1970 was a cartoonist and poet and creator of characters in a cartoon strip for a number of newspapers. This statue depicts Lobby Dosser, who is the sheriff of Calton Creek on his trusty steed El Fideldo. Now, a Lobby Dosser in real life tends to be a homeless person who sleeps in the lobby or stairwell of a tenement. And I love one of the other characters who Sheriff Lobby tries to track down all the time, and that is Rank Badgin. And in Glaswegian parlance, this is someone who is really bad. Rank Badgin, you've got to laugh. Continue on, you'll pass a couple of churches, then on the left-hand side is the Burnbank Bowling Green, which was instituted in 1866. And as the road bends round, you'll pass the St Andrews building on the left-hand side, now part of the University of Glasgow. You're now on Eldon Street, and you'll cross a bridge under which passes the River Kelvin, which is a tributary of the River Clyde. Glasgow University is situated by the River Kelvin in Gilmore Hill. And in 1892, the title of Baron Kelvin was created for physicist and engineer William Thomson, a professor at the university. The name Kelvin for the unit of absolute zero of temperature, which he determined was chosen in his honour, and gives us this connection with the river. Continue up Gibson Street, and at the top of the road turn left into Kelvin Way. You are now entering the Gilmore Hill campus of Glasgow University, and some of the buildings are exquisite. On your left-hand side is Gilmore Hill Halls, an examination hall of the university initially, but now a campus of culture and arts. The building started out as the Gilmore Hill Parish Church, was designed by architect James Sellers in 1878 as the Anderston Free Church, and it was built in a Normandy Gothic style and acquired by the university in 1963. Opposite this building is the Students' Union, a fabulous Scottish baronial-style building designed by the architect and former assistant to James Burnet, Alan MacNaughton, in 1928. Glasgow University Union is one of the largest and oldest student unions in the United Kingdom, serving students and alumni of the Glasgow University since 1885. Before we head further up the street to the amazing Gilbert Scott building, let me tell you a little bit about the founding of Glasgow University. Firstly, it's one of the 4 ancient universities in Scotland, the other 3 being St Andrews, Edinburgh and Aberdeen. Glasgow University was founded in 1451 and is the second oldest in Scotland after St Andrews, which was founded in 1411. It has the highest total enrolment of students in Scotland at nearly 24,000 undergraduates and almost 16,000 postgraduates. The founding was authorised by a charter or papal bull from Pope Nicholas V at the suggestion of King James II of Scotland, and the first meeting of the university was in the chapter house at Glasgow Cathedral in the lower church. By 1463, A new site had been established in the High Street, land provided by Mary Queen of Scots no less. A new college was built around 1660 and centred on 2 courtyards surrounded by walled gardens, with a clock tower which was one of the most notable features of Glasgow's skyline, reaching 140 feet. But by 1870, the decision was taken to move Glasgow University to its present location on Gilmore Hill, where you'll find the Sir George Gilbert Scott building, and that's where we are heading next. It is a fabulous Gothic construction with a huge tower over 200 feet high, with pointed architecture and Scottish-styled crow-stepped gables and turrets with conical roofs. Scott's layout is symmetrical around a great hall. Sir Gilbert Scott was a prolific English Gothic revival architect, mainly involved in the building or renovation of cathedrals and churches. Amazingly, over 800 buildings were designed or altered by him, some of which included the Midland Grand Hotel at St Pancras Station, the Albert Memorial, and St Mary's Cathedral, Glasgow. The first building you come to on the left-hand side before the main university building is Pierce Lodge, which looks like a gatehouse entry from University Avenue into the university beyond. This amazingly complex building was rescued from the 17th century old college on the High Street through the generosity of Sir William Pierce, hence the name Pierce Lodge. It has a number of interesting architectural features. There's 2 main sections, the gateway and a circular stair turret, which has a conical roof. There's a coat of arms above the archway which reflects the erection of the gateway in 1656, and above that is King Charles II's royal coat of arms, the king who was on the throne at that time. And you'll see a sculpture showing a sword crossed with a mace together with CR2, or Charles Rex II, King Charles II. It's not just architecturally beautiful, but important historically as well. Oh, and beware at night, as it's supposed to be haunted. After the lodge, continue up University Avenue, and on the left-hand side you'll see an iron rail fencing leading up to the main gates of the Gilbert Scott building, and the gates themselves are fascinating. They're known as the Memorial Gates or the Quincentennial Gates and celebrate the university's quincentenary or 500th anniversary in 1952. The gates bear the names of 30 distinguished figures associated with the university, such as James II of Scotland, 1430, who was on the throne when it was founded. Bishop William Turnbull, who petitioned Pope Nicholas IV to found the university in the 15th century, and he was the first Chancellor. You also have William Thompson, or Lord Kelvin, to give him his proper title. Donald Dewar was the First Minister of Scotland, and James Watt, the famous Scottish engineer, connected with improvements to the steam engine. Adam Smith is also there, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, to name but a few. Turning to the Gilbert Scott University itself, the building immediately facing the gate is the Hunterian Museum, named after William Hunter, a Scottish anatomist and physician who studied at the University of Glasgow. He died in 1783 and left his entire personal collection of medical paraphernalia, coins, minerals, paintings, prints, as well as books and manuscripts to the Glasgow University. They were all housed initially in the Old College on the High Street in 1807, but moved when the Old College closed. The Hunterian, as it's known, is actually a number of museums run by the University of Glasgow in Glasgow to display all of William Hunter's collection, and it is vast. It's the oldest museum in Scotland and includes the Hunterian Museum here at the Gilbert Scott building, the Hunterian Art Gallery, the Mackintosh House, the Zoology Museum and the Anatomy Museum, which are all located in various buildings on the main campus of the university in the West End of Glasgow. We'll come to the Hunterian Art Gallery and Mackintosh House shortly, but directly across the street from the university is the Macmillan Reading Room or Library, a fabulous circular dome building opened in 1939, which is said is meant to be a modern interpretation of the Pantheon in Rome. The entrance is a set of steps leading up to a huge glass-fronted archway in a rectangular frame with glazed timbered doors leading to the inside, and it's named after benefactors Robert and Edith Macmillan. Well, continue along University Avenue and at the next junction, turn right into Hillhead Street. Now, you may not be able to take a car up here, but you can walk up to the next part of the William Hunter collection, and that is the Hunterian Art Gallery and the Mackintosh House. The gallery displays the university's extensive art collection, and there's also an outdoor sculpture garden. And if you're a fan of the celebrated Scottish architect Charles Rennie Mackintosh, then you'll be interested to see many of his paintings hanging here. But the first building you'll see on the left-hand side as you walk up this street is the Mackintosh House, with Hunterian Art Gallery behind it. It's a modern concrete building with some of Mackintosh's design features, but he did not design this house. It stands here because Mackintosh lived at 78 South Park Avenue, not far from here, in one of 2 rows of terraced houses which were unfortunately demolished with the expansion of the university buildings. Although the outside gives an impression of the type of house that Mackintosh designed, the internal rooms replicate the room layout of Mackintosh's original house and include items of his original furniture, fitments and decorations. A really wonderful collection. Continue down University Avenue until you arrive at the end of the road and you meet Byers Road. You will have passed some very modern buildings both left and right, all attached to Glasgow University. The one on the right is the James McEwen Smith Learning Hub. I've been asked many times who this famous son of Scotland is to have his name associated with the university. Well, he's not Scottish. He was an early 19th century American physician. Indeed, he was the first African American to earn a medical degree which was awarded by the University of, yes, you've guessed it, Glasgow. When he returned to the USA, he was the first African American to run a pharmacy. So there you have it. Immediately after the Learning Hub is the Boyd Orr building. And once more, who is this individual Boyd Orr? Well, his is a fascinating story as well, and through gritty determination he obtained the necessary educational qualifications to achieve a scholarship to Glasgow University. He was a teacher, a doctor, biologist, nutritional physiologist, politician, businessman and a farmer who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his scientific research into nutrition. Oh, and he was also a rector of the University of Glasgow at some stage. But when you dig a bit deeper, this man was also a medical officer during the First World War, 1914 to 1918, serving with the Sherwood Foresters, and, according to reports, he spent a great deal of time in shell holes patching up injured soldiers. Amazingly, he was awarded a military cross after the Battle of the Somme, and a Distinguished Service Order after Passchendaele, both terrible battles which resulted in appalling casualties to the British Army. Well, we have arrived at Byers Road. This is the west end of Glasgow and, due to the proximity of the university, has become a hub of cafes, restaurants, small shops and good pubs. But that, my friends, is for next time, as I'm going to stop here, bringing the second part of Glasgow tour to a close. It's been fun traversing the city from east to west and letting you see the different parts of the city and to give you some idea as to how it developed over the years. I hope you've enjoyed this wee panoramic tour of central Glasgow. It's just a taste, and although I've covered some of the highlights, there's still so much more to see. In my next podcast, Glasgow Part 3, I will take us down Byers Road and into Kelvingrove Park, where we'll find the amazing Kelvingrove Art Gallery and Museum. Much to talk about there. We'll then head down to the waterfront to have a look at the futuristic auditoria which house the conference centres of Glasgow. We'll then visit the Transport Museum, celebrating transport down the centuries. Then we'll cross the River Clyde and visit the Science Museum, and also the television studios of the BBC and Scottish Television. And as we're by the river, I'll introduce my following podcast on shipbuilding on the Clyde. Well, as always, I have thoroughly enjoyed bringing a part of Scotland to you. I always welcome feedback, so if you wish to comment on any of the areas we've visited today, or if you wish me to cover any aspect of Scottish life, then please get in touch through the contact page on my website, or send an email to info@exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. I'm also very pleased to have heard from so many of you who have listened to the podcast, and it's always great to meet some of you personally. Keep your messages of support coming, and don't forget, if you do intend visiting Scotland and you want the best experience with a guide, then please do get in touch to discuss the possibility of a tour with me in a luxury Mercedes car. If you don't wish to have a formal guide, then perhaps one of my bespoke itineraries may help you plan a more spectacular holiday. Once again, get in touch through my website, exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk, or email me directly, john@exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. I was delighted to hear from an old naval colleague who found my podcast by accident, so thank you to Jerry Lambert for getting in touch, and pleased to hear that you enjoyed my series on the North Coast 500. Good luck with the trip with the boys. I'm sure they'll love it. And do call into the Strathnaven Museum in Betty Hill, which gives a fascinating insight to life over the last few hundred years, and of course to see my clan's museum, the Mackay clan. Oh, and do send a photo of the family by the marble obelisk showing Mackay country, please. I've had a few photos from people who have followed my NC 500 series, so do please keep those coming as well. Thank you, I really do appreciate it. And may I say thank you so much to those of you who have bought me a coffee, and if you wish to contribute in a small way to these podcasts, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Unique Scotland. All contributions are much appreciated. Well, it's been a pleasure having you all listening today, and I'd now like to sign off in traditional Scottish fashion by raising my glass with a wee dram to you wherever you are in the world. Slanjava.
You've been listening to the Unique Scotland podcast with exclusivescottishvisits.co.uk. To receive all our episodes automatically, please subscribe now.